Could Apple beat Google at its own game? Could one day someone say, I want to Siri search something, I want to Apple search something? Let's talk about what could happen if Apple was to launch a search engine of its own. Hey, what up? It's your boy MobbJustice back again with another video. Thank you to everyone who's been watching our videos and for all the support throughout the year. Now for today, we're touching on something that's a little bit different, just some word on the street that Apple might be preparing to launch a search engine of its own. Now, whether that ends up happening or not happening, let's just talk about what could happen if they did. So the question that might be asked at this time is, why would Apple want to rival Google or even attempt to have its own search engine? And the key one that I can think about if I'm Apple, and when you think about their messaging, is privacy. For a long time, Apple has positioned itself and actually sold to its customers that it cares about privacy, doesn't collect data, all of these issues which Google is notorious for, right? So you have these diametrically opposed views, sort of fighting for dominance. And one might understand why Apple would want to start controlling search on that end, just so that it can keep protecting the privacy of its users, because you sell iPhones, for example, on the promise of it's a secure device, we're not collecting your data, etc. But you have Google, being the default search engine on the default browser, right? And you then have Google. And we know that Google is collecting data on that end. So if you're Apple, you're now thinking about, those privacy concerns and how to actually make that value proposition a bit better. The problem for Apple is that they might actually end up losing a lot of revenue from such a move. Through the investigations into antitrust and monopoly power that we've actually spoken about on this show, it's been discovered that Google actually pays $8 to $12 billion each year to make themselves the default search engine on Apple devices. So there is that trade-off that if Apple really does go ahead with this move, that is revenue that might not come into their coffers or possibly go to shareholders, right? And as a profit-making company that we know Apple to be, that might be a big consideration that they're thinking about. Now, this issue of Apple perhaps launching its own search engine has been swirling around for some time. I'm going to leave a article linked in the description just so that you can see some of the thoughts that people have, but I want to touch on three specific issues. The first one is just around iOS 14. If you look at that and you do like a spotlight search on an iPhone, right, you'll see that Apple has actually started presenting its own search results and linking directly to websites and things like that. And that's a small implementation, so that's a little piece of the software itself. Also, when you look at Siri, Siri does Siri suggestions and issues like that. So that's also another possible implementation on that end. The other key thing is the fact that Apple has actually been hiring and advertising for a lot of search positions at the moment. They're looking for search engineers and people that can actually help to improve their search product. And then the third one, this one is a bit technical, a bit geeky. I'll try to explain it as much as I can, but basically Apple has something called Applebot, which is their web crawler. And in the last couple of months, it's been seen in the developer community that there's been a lot of uptick in activity with this web crawler, indicating that Apple might be doing a lot of things online, trying to experiment, trying to improve it. And unless you're a developer, I'm keen to engage in the comments. Let me know how these web crawlers actually work. But it's been seen that there's been an increase in activity activity from that Apple bot, and that's one of the things that's making people think that Apple is, you know, on the cusp of coming up with its own engine. Now, with any new product or development, we have to think about the pros and the cons, right? It's good that Apple is thinking about this, if they are, because it would introduce competition into the market. But there are a couple of problems. The first one, right? Google is dominant. Google is Google because they've literally been making Google a thing for the last 2 decades. So before we even go anywhere, as much money as Apple has, Google has a 2-decade head start. Their technology has far surpassed anyone else, and globally they command about 80% of the search market globally, right? And that's no laughing matter, right? They are a dominant player. So if Apple does decide to do that, right, that's one of the issues that they're going to face. But at the same time, because Apple has its ecosystem and so many devices that are online, and it is making this transition where it's trying to become more of a services-based company, it does make sense the place that a search engine of their own would have in the business, right? Unfortunately for Apple, because they are so big, if they are to launch a search engine, they would automatically become a big player in the market. They might not command the 80% of Google, but think about the billions of devices that they have out there, right? That already becomes almost an instant install base of people that they have around the world. And the issue with that is that, yes, on the one hand, it's a good thing that you have a big install base, but at the same time, it can also put a glaring spotlight on any issues that people might have with that search engine, because so many devices, if there is an issue, it's an issue that's now affecting a lot of people. And if anything is evidence of this, it's Apple Maps. A few years ago, Apple actually launched its Maps product, sort of going against Google Maps, which is the default or a standard for many people around the world. And it didn't go, you know, that well. You know, to this day, even I'm still skeptical in a lot of cases about Apple Maps. They've improved it a lot over the years, but the initial launch and the way that that thing went, it didn't go over well, and it was half-baked. It didn't work that well, and it left a bad taste in a lot of users' minds. So getting over that stigma and that perception is something that Apple has had to fight with, and it's a risk that they may face if they decide to go forward with this search engine. Perhaps the biggest issue that I would foresee for Apple is their stance on privacy. We mentioned it earlier on that Apple has been big on its privacy stance, but the reason that's important is simply because unlike Google, Google collects data, and that data is what they use to actually improve their platforms and their products, right? And if Apple is a company that then says they don't collect data, right, as good as that is for privacy, on the side of trying to develop a big platform such as a search engine and then trying to improve it, it means that Apple would have to work that much harder. Once again, I'm not a developer, but you can just foresee how that would be a big stumbling block for them. The fact that Google does collect data means that their platform has been able to develop and become what it is today. And that then leads on to the second point around this privacy issue, because Apple doesn't collect the data, it means it's unlikely that it's going to be passing anything on or opening up the platform to advertisers, because part of the data collection on the side of Google is what makes it an attractive proposition for advertisers around the world, making them one of the biggest advertising companies in the world. At the end of the day, advertising is Google's biggest revenue earner, right? But looking at how Apple works, it's unlikely, at least in its current form, to one, venture into advertising, and two, collect the type of data that would allow for them to serve online ads in the same way that Google does. And that now brings into question the $8 to $12 billion that we spoke about earlier on. How do you replace that income? if you do have a search engine, is it a search engine that's going to make money for Apple, or is it a search engine that's just there to enhance the user experience for iPhone, iPad, iPod, MacBook users, right? You're thinking on that end. Also, if there are these costs, what are they going to do? Because there's research and development, you have to make it better. Does that mean that they're going to pass that cost on to the consumer? These are all the issues that you sort of have to think about on that end. So overall, I think, if Apple is really serious about this, if what's being spoken about is a thing, if Apple does take what it's doing with Siri, what it's doing with Spotlight search, and actually bakes it into some type of an overall search engine, it would definitely be welcome. Unfortunately, Google is Google and it is a dominant player. But Apple being Apple, you also then wonder, do they really care about market share that much, or will it be more of a selling item for their consumers on the devices side? That's the first thing. The second thing is also to consider the fact that if Apple does come in, even with the money that it does, it's not the only player, right? As much as we talk about Google, there are other search engines out there, right? You can think about Bing. I think that's one of the biggest ones that's there. Once upon a time, Yahoo search was a thing, and there's also DuckDuckGo. And then lastly is just the fact that just because Apple is as big as it is, the biggest company in the world, they did achieve that $2 trillion market capitalization figure, all of the stuff, they have cash on hand, they can throw money at this and build out a product. Having money and building a product does not always guarantee success. The closure of Quibi, that is the Quick Bites mobile streaming site that was set to take on sites like YouTube and Netflix, right, with Meg Whitman and Jeffrey Katzenberg, right? It was such a good idea. I thought it was a novel idea, but the lockdown and the formula, the implementation, not understanding the customer, all of these issues meant that even though they had raised close to $2 billion to develop a platform, it just did not work. And in the same way, we can't just expect that Apple, just because Apple is Apple, that they will succeed if they decide to get into search. And Apple Maps and that experience is a very good idea and evidence and use case and case study of how Apple does get some things wrong. In the same breath, Apple will be Apple, and if they do go ahead with this search issue, it's likely that they will implement it in an Apple way. We've spoken about it time and time again that Apple is usually not the first to do something, but when they do it, people do pay attention and they tend to do it in their own way and implement it in a way that is usually new and usually fresh. So it would be cool to see what Apple's take is on search. So that's been it for this video. Let me know what you think. As I said, it would be good to have another search engine in the market, but the type of ground that Google has been able to cover over the last decade is not going to be a walkover to actually compete with. And if Apple is serious about this, they need to come through with a well-baked idea, not what they did with the launch of Apple Maps. So that's been it. Let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think of this? Is this something that you were even aware of? If Apple changed the default search engine, would you even notice? Let us know what you think, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.
This is Muffs Too Much, and you're watching MobbJustice TV. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter. We're there on YouTube. Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe.